Maybe you've been asking yourself a lot of questions. When will God answer my prayer? When will God fulfill His promises in my life? A lot of questions are coming in your mind. You are trying to give up. Yes, you are a human being. But always know that God's plans are not your plan. While you are there trying to figure out how God will fulfill His promises, He is doing all His plans behind the scene. So you as a human being, wait on God. While God is fulfilling the promises that He gave you behind the scene, your work is to pray and believe in God and trust that God is going to fulfill all His promises. We human beings, we are limited. There are things that we cannot do without the power of God. That's why God described in the book of Isaiah, for His thoughts is not our thoughts, neither His ways are not our ways. As heavens higher than the earth, so as His ways higher than our ways. Whatever God promised will come to pass. It's not your work to figure out how and when will it come to pass. Your part is to wait and to pray and to trust in God that whatever He promised you will come to pass. When God promises the birth of our Messiah Jesus Christ to be born, the prophecy was in the Old Testament. It took many years for Jesus Christ to be born. The prophecy, the promised, was fulfilled in the New Testament. After many years, many people waited to see Jesus Christ, but they didn't see Him. God's plan was Jesus to be born in an ordinary family. That one was God's plan and His thoughts. That's why God described that His ways is not like our ways and His thoughts are not like our thoughts. His thought was for Jesus to be born in an ordinary family. But humans' thoughts and their expectations were Jesus to be born from a rich family. And that's what many people were expecting. So when Jesus Christ was born, then it said that He is Messiah. Many people rejected Him. Many people didn't believe that He is the real Messiah that was promised in the book of Isaiah. Many people were expecting Messiah to be born from a rich family. But that was not according to God's will and His plan. That's why God described in the book of Isaiah that His thoughts and His ways are not like ours. As heaven is above higher than earth, same as His thoughts and His ways are above our thoughts and our ways. There's something that God promised you, and you have been waiting for that thing so long. Maybe you have been waiting God to give you a child. You have been praying and expecting that before the end of New Year, you are going to receive a child. Yet God's plan is not your plan. God is seeing a child after 2 years. You are seeing a child after 1 year. But God is seeing a child after 2 years, after 3 years. We human beings, we care about the time. But God doesn't care about the time. Whatever God promised you will come to pass. God promised Abraham a son, even though himself and Sarah had already passed the age of childbearing. Abraham had faith in God, and it shows that he was willing to wait for God's time. But Sarah did not have faith in God. When God promised Abraham that He will give him a son, Sarah looked at her age and the age of her husband. They cannot have a child. But that was not according to God's thoughts. God's thoughts and His ways are far away than our thoughts. Because Sarah did not have faith in God, she thought that her ways and her thoughts are like God's ways and God's thoughts. She convinced her husband to have a child with the Egyptian woman, which was not according to God's plan. And that didn't stop God to fulfill His promise, because God promised Abraham that he will have many descendants. So even though Sarah went ahead of God and used her thoughts to convince her husband to marry a maid so that they can have a child, she was trying to help God to fulfill His promise. But that's not how God works. God fulfilled His promise. No matter how long you are waiting, God will fulfill His promise. And know that your ways are not according to God's ways. When Isaac was born, God's promise was fulfilled. God's promise will never fail. God's promise will never die. God will fulfill His promises on His own ways and His own strength. You as a human being, you cannot support God to fulfill His promises. And if you try to go ahead of God, it will not end well for you. Waiting for God's promises requires faith, trust, and patience in God. While you are praying and believing that whatever God promised you, it will come to pass. Whatever you ask God in prayer and you believe in it, it will come to pass. God will fulfill his promise no matter how long it will take. If God promised you that you will get married, you will get married. If God promised you that you will have your own land, you will have. If God promised you a house, you will have house. If God promised you a marriage, God will give you a good marriage. If God promised you a child, God will give you a child. If God promised you healing, God will heal you. There's power in waiting in God.